Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of stories affecting the Sikh community around the world, and you may recall a story that we reported on just a short while ago with the Sikh community rescuing a small British football club. Well, we then followed up with the shocking revelation that those philanthropic Sikhs were linked apparently to terrorism, something I said at the time that sounded immediately suspicious and would look into it. Well, we did, and guess what? The conspiracy runs much deeper than we realise, as over 200 global Sikh organisations have united to tell the truth about what's going on behind the scenes. And, of course, where the finger points is no surprise. More on that in a moment. But also, as hate crime rises across the West, we have a lovely viral video that flies in the opposite direction. Stay tuned for that one. All that and more on today's show. But joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. And if you're here on the west coast of Canada, it was probably spent trying to dry out. So it has been an ugly weekend with weather, rain, and flooding throughout the region, and more rain on the way. For those who are on the west coast, prepare and make sure, unlike me, make sure your drains are all clear around the house, or you will end up with flooding as well. So again, we are moving on to the week. Hopefully we'll stay above water this week with your comments as well included at the end of the show to sit, relax in the warmth of your home and hopefully dryness. You can check out the comments, but we will have some at the end of the show tonight, so stick around for that. Back to you, Angus.
Indeed. Glad to see you back, James. But in the meantime, James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And indeed, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at a few of your comments, which have been filling up below the video. So thank you for those. Right, James, lots to get through as always this morning. What are you going to start us off with?
It was a busy week in Western Canada. There were several community town hall meetings that were held to discuss the extortion and the violence that's been plaguing and targeting the South Asian community, in particular the Sikh community. The latest round of these town halls on Saturday was in Calgary, and then yesterday was held in Surrey, British Columbia. Now, we will have more reports on that tomorrow night about the actual town hall meetings, but one of the big concerns coming out of the situation is the Mayor of Surrey, Brenda Locke, raising the alarm about the Canadian system of claiming asylum and refugee status as a result of being potentially ejected from Canada as a result of crime. Now, there are a group of individuals have been targeted by the investigation for being involved in the current spat of extortion attempts, violent shootings, arsons, and other areas. Now, with that said, 14 of these individuals have now declared or applied for asylum in Canada, refugee status. This means that even though they've been labeled as members of the gangs who have been involved in this criminality and this violence, they now have a very long process to go through before Canada can remove them. This is a part of a large group of individuals that have been focused in on during these investigations of over 100 individuals. And these particular individuals, as I said, have declared or have filed for the refugee status, and we anticipate more to do so as a way to get around being, as I said, removed from the country. Ironically, now they are declaring that if they are removed to India, they face potential threats to their life and safety at the hands of the gangs that they are working for here in Canada, as well as potentially the government of India and the police forces in India, which really is a real slap in the face to Canadians when it comes to trying to keep our streets safe and to protect our very valued diaspora throughout the country. Now, these town hall meetings, as I stated, are going ahead across the nation, and they're organized by the World Sikh Organization and other organizations that have a large stakehold in what's going on. The mayor, as I said, Brenda Locke, has described this as appalling and a direct slap in the face to the victims and the law-abiding citizens in the city of Surrey. We've been keeping count of the extortion files here in Surrey in terms of the count, and currently it's up at around 106 now extortion files, as well as 44 confirmed shootings and 76 confirmed unique victims. Now, this could be also a big concern when we are looking at the status as we go into the holidays and we move forward. Of course, we know that over the Christmas holiday break, there is an added strain on law enforcement. This is not only to deal with mental health issues of people in the community, but also other crimes that rise generally at this time of year, putting even a further strain. The City of Surrey Police Service does have their own targeted task force to deal with the extortion program or the extortion attempts and the crimes. But again, is it really enough, or are we doing too little and too late? We need to focus on the ability of the Canadian government and law enforcement to have these people removed from the country without a lengthy, which probably in all reality is going to take years to get through not only the original appeals to appeal the rejection orders or the refusal of the status for refugees or asylum. But then it goes on to several other layers of appeals. And again, this takes years to get through. And it is very frustrating for law enforcement. It's very frustrating for politicians and very frustrating for our communities that are being the target of these violent acts. So again, we are just looking at them utilizing our own system against us here in Canada when they are very much involved in targeting and not respecting the laws of the land, and therefore should not be allowed this lengthy process. Something that I see is that in this digital day and age, in my personal opinion, is that if you are considered non-acceptance in Canada, if you are being rejected for criminality, then you can appeal from your home nation with the ability of the internet to do FaceTime or any other of these applications where you can have an online hearing and appeal process. You should be ejected and go through the appeal process elsewhere from your home nation if you are breaking laws and putting our society at risk. If you are then, in fact, allowed and granted the appeal in a successful bid, then you can come back. But I don't believe in allowing them these years of ongoing threats to our community and to our Sikh neighbors and friends. They need to be protected at all costs, and that shouldn't be allowed to be circumvented by the current immigration policy and laws that are in place. As we move forward, we look now in Edmonton specifically as two more Punjabi individuals have been killed. Another double homicide, and that is facing something that's going across the nation. Friday morning in Silverberry, there was a group of Punjabi individuals, some students, others who are former students, who are waiting for their application to become permanent residents in Canada. They were at a party, about 12 of them at the end of the night were enjoying themselves. They decided to go and get something to eat. They were taking two different vehicles. One of those vehicles was cut off in the area of 32nd Street and 26th Avenue. At that point, when they were cut off, they were shot at and they were located in the vehicle and one near the vehicle, trying to escape these attackers. We have also learned that these are considered targeted attacks, and one of the big concerns of the India diaspora, or people in India, particularly the family members, are concerned at the term targeted. Now, for clarification, it does not mean that these individuals were involved in criminality. What it means is that they could have been involved in criminality, but they also could have just been in a vehicle that belonged to someone else that was targeted for a specific reason. It could be that somebody at the party was actually the intended target, but these individuals were targeted because they were easier to get at and to send a message. So there's a lot of different reasons that this could be claimed or labeled as targeted, not that they were specifically involved in criminality. So again, very important for people to understand that. Now, the timeline of this event was at 2 p.m. They believe that 12 hours before the shooting, the EPS or Edmonton Police Service have specifically requested dash cam of anybody in that area because they do believe that the individuals who were targeting the group were there and scoping it out, or casing it as it's referred to, and getting an idea of escape routes and all of that. So if you have dash cam footage in that area during the 12 to 24 hours prior to the murders, then again, the Edmonton Police Service is asking you to please forward any dash cam that you may have, as it could help to further the investigation. These individuals were ambushed. They were just at a gathering. And again, this is so important for any community of students that are coming to Canada to study, to be able to feel secure and to start gathering in these community settings, whether that's the Sikh community, whether it's the Asian, the Chinese, the Japanese, or Middle Eastern. Doesn't matter where they're from. If they can assimilate to the society, it is so much easier for them to do so when they find like-minded individuals from either their own towns or neighboring towns in their home countries. And that is how they start to assimilate, but also to feel a sense of belonging here in Canada. When these events are targeted by individuals who are looking to cause mayhem in our streets, then that takes away the safety of these students who are trying to achieve a better life. Many of the parents and the families of these students have given everything that they have. They have mortgaged farms or sold businesses. They have done everything they can to give their child an opportunity that they did not have, to give them an opportunity at a better life, to find a peace within themselves through higher education. And when that is stripped away, it not only impacts of course, the emotional well-being of all in the community, but also with the families at home. It can literally bankrupt them, not only emotionally, but financially as well. And that makes it an even bigger tragedy for the victims of these senseless crimes. And again, just because you hear that they have been targeted does not mean that they were involved in criminality. So very, very important. Now, the two victims, first of all, Gurdeep arrived in Canada approximately 2.5 years prior to his death, and like thousands of others, came on a student visa. And he was viewing his education as his pathway to permanent residency, and he was under or in that process. The other individual was fairly new to Canada. That was Ranveer Singh, and he had just arrived recently. So this, being an 18-year-old in a foreign land, this was so important for him to start to hang out with his peers and to start finding a way to navigate a whole new culture. And that's sad that this has happened. But we'll leave that for now. We will touch back on this in a few other details tomorrow night to look at other aspects of this crime and what the Edmonton Police Service are doing about it and what they are saying with updates. Now, as we continue on, we will touch on the horrifying events that have happened not only in the United States over this past weekend at Brown University, but also in Australia. Australia has seen a horrific mass casualty event that we don't normally see in that nation. Now, as I sit here at the studio, of course, we bring reports on many international issues that are of importance to the world. And as I sit here, there's the hum of the teleprompter, the warmth of the HVAC, but it usually serves as a barrier between the news and the soul. Because as journalists, Angus, myself, and others are trained to be conduits, not the containers of the world's grief. Yet there are moments in history, and this happens to be one, where the cumulative weight of events breaks through the professional detachment. This week, as we come to the end of 2025, it's drawing close, and we find ourselves standing in the wreckage of two distinct yet hauntingly similar catastrophes. The events are separated by vast geography, but they are also the turning point of the seasons, but united by a singular terrifying thread, and that is the violation of sanctuary. This includes from the sun-bleached shores of Sydney, Australia, to the frost-touched brick of Providence, Rhode Island. And we have witnessed the systemic dismantling of the spaces we once deemed safe. The whole idea of the safety in numbers has been shattered, and instead it becomes possibly a target of violence instead of a safety. Now, as we continue on, both of these events have been transformed into kill zones. The report is not merely a recounting of the attacks of the Bondi Junction and Brown University. It's also, as we go through it, and we won't go through it all tonight, but you can find the full report on our Substack. And we can look at how this is going forward. It's an autopsy of the societal conditions that allowed them to happen, a eulogy for the lives stolen, and a desperate inquiry into the forces, mental illnesses, radicalization, and systemic failures that are shaping our world into a landscape of perpetual violence. We know that the individuals in the Australia attack were a father and son. They were radicalized by online internet-based groups and information. We're seeing this more and more as society turns to the information that's being propagated online to create division, to sow anger and fear, to divide communities and nations. But most of all, it is taking away the human right that we all have under the same sun, walking on the same soil, breathing the same air. But there are some of us, or not some of us, but some people out there who are looking to cause a dark cloud over what can be a bright future for others. There are individuals in the Brown University shooting that have experienced and witnessed school shootings previously. It is not a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. It is something that is becoming normalized. And with that said, of course, we know that when you look at Australia, over 500% increase in crimes that have to do with anti-Semitism. It is on a trajectory that is skyrocketing. It is something that we in today's society should be fighting against, things that we should be identifying when it comes to the online use that Angus and I talk about all the time. The bots, the misinformation, the disinformation, the intentional representation of truth when it is the furthest thing from truth. But because they are able to make it appear as legitimate, they are creating the anger and the frustration and the division of societies. That is just a scary thought. Now, at 3 p.m. Australian time, the sanctuary was breached, where a 40-year-old man from Queensland entered, the area. And as a casual observer, he was unremarkable, a man in a sports jersey blending into the crowd. But beneath the surface, he was a man unraveled. He was untethered from society, effectively homeless, living a transient existence that saw him sleeping in his vehicle and cheap hostels, driving south from Queensland to New South Wales. Now, as we talk about this is now not only a moment of hesitation that may or may not have happened, but instead it's a cruel taunt of fate. 10 minutes later, he returned to that point. The hesitation was gone. His hand was 30 centimeter, 12-inch knife, and a weapon of medieval brutality in this particular attack and in others. It's an atmosphere that we are seeing in repetition. It is really a time to stand up and stand firm to protect each other and insist that politicians start looking at these crimes as what they are, and that is an attack on the psyche of all citizens. It's a terror attack, whether it's domestic or foreign. It is creating a world in which people fear each other, that they can't trust each other, and more people are locking themselves up in their homes, while others who are going untreated for mental health concerns and mental health illnesses are left to fend for themselves. We've seen the cutbacks in healthcare, mental health, and otherwise that are leading to increased levels of violence in our communities. But when we get to this point, we have to take a look at the real potential for the internet to create these situations. And we need to come together, bring people together to shine their individual light, to brighten a world of darkness. And we need to look at the intervention strategies. We need to look at all of these different ways in which this can be prevented. The sad part about these mass acts of violence is that in over 90% of incidences, there are warning signs, there are indicators, and even in many cases, the individuals have verbalized it out loud to others or put their plans in some context on the internet as a cry for help, begging for somebody to stop them, or just to try and create that notoriety that they feel they may have in death, that they are overlooked in life. So these are very important things. And again, we have covered warning signs and indicators in past stories, and we will again in the future, because it is up to each and every one of us to come forward and to prevent the anti-Semitism, to prevent racism aimed at our Sikh community, at the Hindu community, at the Buddhist community, at the Christian community. We all need to come together as one and to prevent mass acts of violence such as what we have seen over the weekend. Once again, we do have a very extensive report on this incident on both sides of it in Australia and in the US over the past weekend. We will have that on our Substack. But in closing, I would like to extend on behalf of course, Satledge, myself, and Angus, our thoughts to all of those who have been impacted. But at the end of the day, remember, thoughts and prayers are offered because people don't feel like they can do anything else about it. They feel that that is all that they can do, but they are wrong. You can educate yourself on the warning signs and indicators. You can act instead of judging the individual or second guessing yourself. If you feel that there is a risk, speak out, because it's better to be speaking out and in doing so in error than it is to keep silent and be a party to a massacre of things that we've seen on College Hill and elsewhere, Angus.
Yeah, terrible events in Australia over the weekend. But there's a differentiator here, of course. There are those mass shootings that sadly seem to be all too common in the United States, that tend to be just sort of disaffected or even mentally ill young white boys who've been behind that for whatever terrible reasons that put them in that situation. But of course, there are these hate crimes that are driven by plain and simple, good old-fashioned religious extremism. And this, sadly, I mean, we don't know the full facts of Australia yet, but the fact is it was clearly an anti-Semitic attack. I think the event speaks for itself. So clearly and presumably it was driven by religious extremism. And sadly, these events are increasingly occurring across Western democratic nations. We, of course, have suffered them here in the United Kingdom on several occasions, sadly. These mass killings driven by religious extremism, and they tend to come from the Islamic community. I'm not tarnishing the whole Islamic community. Of course, again, it's the extremist element that is behind this. And sadly, and one of the uncomfortable facts really in life is that there are countries out there, and there are communities and societies out there that wish to do us harm, particularly us here in the West. And we have become our own worst enemies because, of course, and this is where the West and why Sikhi aligns so closely with Western values, because the Sikh community suffers the same disadvantage, and this has come up regularly, is that we are our own worst enemies because we are seen as weak, because we are accepting, we are inviting, we are kind, we invite these people into our societies. We've lowered the barriers to let these extremists in, and you know, our default position is we trust them. We trust them first, and then if they betray that trust, then we try and react. But that has, of course, as I say, the Sikh community have suffered that same issue where Sikhs by default are open, kind, generous, and trusting. But you betray them, and God help you. That's another situation. But ultimately, that means that they are taken advantage of, and people out there, societies and extremists out there in the world, are taking advantage of Western society. And I mean, I don't even need to sort of say which direction that comes from. It sadly happens all too frequently in the West. These attacks from it tends to be, generally speaking, Islamic extremism. Ironically, it's also Indian extremism, which is another aspect to all this, which will come into to my first story in a moment. But ultimately, we have become our own worst enemies. And interesting, there's a link to your first story there, James, is, of course, when we have to react to this. Of course, when these extremists get into our societies, live amongst us, and then launch these terrible attacks, is that then, okay, what do we do about them? Now, do we try and deport them? Of course, they go through our process of law, which again is designed to be to give them a completely fair and just hearing. That is the basis of democratic rule of law. So they are given the opportunity to explain themselves and defend themselves and prove their innocence, if indeed they are innocent. Sadly, again, these people take advantage of our own system because, as we've discussed before, and certainly as we've noticed here in the United Kingdom, and certainly, James, in your first story, it appears you have exactly the same issue in Canada, is we find ourselves unable to deport many of these people because we have set our own rules so strictly to protect our own citizens that we find we can't even deport those who wish us harm. And certainly here in the UK, we've had many high-profile cases of individuals, extremists, particularly Islamic extremists, who we have tried to deport to various countries around the world. And we find we can't because they use the system against us. There is a whole legal structure that has established itself to prevent their own deportation. We in the UK are signed up to the European Court of Human Rights, and again, on the face of it, this is a good thing. This is good that we have signed as a nation up to this. It's not global; it's European arbitrator, so that people's human rights can be heard by an independent body. Now, sadly, the ECHR, as it's called, tends to rule a little bit zealously in favour of human rights. Now, on the face of it, that's great. But what we're finding here in the UK is that we've had many cases of people who've committed dreadful crimes. They've committed dreadful sexual assaults, rapes, they've committed murder, dreadful murders, etc. And we've tried to deport them. Our country has tried to deport them, like the same in Canada. But their legal team uses lawfare, as it's called, and they immediately appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, who say, no, you can't deport them, because they'll come up with all sorts of excuses like, oh, my home country is zealously Islamic, is an extreme form of Islam that does not accept anybody from the LGBTQ part of society. In other words, so what they'll do is they'll suddenly claim they are homosexual, and therefore legally we can't deport them. Now, they may not be homosexual, but how easy to say, oh, I'm homosexual, you can't deport me. And a judge here in the UK say, well, sorry, we can't deport you. That's it. You've got to stay here in the country. Or there's been this mass conversion. Get this. There's been a mass conversion to Christianity. And suddenly these individuals who commit these crimes suddenly convert from Islam to Christianity because it gives them various legal defences here in the UK. I can't be deported to my Islamic country because I will be persecuted as a Christian. I mean, the irony drips deep there. So these are the sort of tactics that these people are using against us. And this is a problem that we have in the West with this mass migration, this mass immigration that we're suffering now right across the Western world from these sorts of countries. Now, many of those immigrants are genuine, decent people fleeing, whatever it is they're fleeing. It's usually economic issues rather than anything else. But ultimately, we are welcoming. We welcome. We as a modern society, we try to offer them sanctuary. To use that word you use, James, we offer offer them sanctuary in our nations. But there are those, as I said, who wish us to do us harm. They take advantage of the system, they exploit the system, they bring their depraved criminal minds with them, their hatred driven by their extremist ideology, and they attack our societies, they attack our individuals, they do these awful mass killings, and that is a problem, James. And unfortunately, the final lesson of all this, and to bring this all to a final conclusion, what happens about this? Well, the lesson to the leftist and the progressive liberals amongst us who are labelled as the do-gooders, who actually stand up and say, no, we must offer sanctuary. Yes, in theory, that's great, but when it goes wrong, the only answer to that is what you're seeing in the United States. It's Donald Trump. There's the mass backlash from the right wing, and certainly from the extreme right wing, saying, right, you are bringing these people, your policies have brought these people amongst us, we are being exploited. The only way to solve this is ICE. It is a robust response, and you're not going to like it, but unfortunately this is the ultimate inevitable, unavoidable consequence of letting these people into our society. The only way to remove them is to go the other way, and it requires draconian measures. None of us want draconian measures, but that is the only way we end up being able to deport these depraved individuals from our Western modern 21st century societies, James. That's sadly where it leads.
Absolutely. And I mean, let's face it, Angus, is that if they are truly concerned about being persecuted, about being killed, about being attacked when they are returned to their home nation, then they need to behave themselves while they are here. If they are truly looking for a better life, they are the individuals that are working hard, that are contributing, that are honoring the country that is offering them that new chance or that new start. They are not coming in and they are not breaking laws, knowing that they risk being ejected and then take advantage of the safety guards that are in place for others. If you break the law and you are acting out in a way that threatens the safety and the public, then boom, you're out of here, and that's my opinion. We've got to protect those who need protection, who are here for the right reasons, and get rid of those who are just here for criminal purposes or nefarious purposes at the end of the day. And in final comment to that, Angus, is another concern, of course, when we look at these mass acts of violence, there is a mental health portion to some of them. And when we look at today's statistics, it has been just recently released that in the United States, over 40% of individuals, of youth who are seeking help for mental health issues are turning to AI. 40%, they are turning to a machine that has been programmed by people who are not necessarily professionals in this industry, and they are getting help by the machine, or allegedly getting help, or turning to those machines for the assistance. That shows a real issue when it comes to the affordability and accessibility of mental health assistance for those who are crying out to get the help they need.
Indeed, that's actually quite terrifying. And in fact, you read in the news currently that youngsters have committed suicide, essentially egged on by AI, because they become friends with AI, and AI is a bit of an echo chamber. It will almost tell you what you want to hear, and you end up in this terrible doom loop of, I want to commit suicide, and AI tells you, well, okay, if that's the way you feel, do it. Sadly, it's driven many youngsters to suicide.
Sad reality of technology.
We've got to be very careful with these things. So, anyway, let's move on, James. And this story is actually linked to what we're talking about. Ironically, is this terrorism that we've imported into the West. Of course, there are innocents caught up in this as well. And as a result of this sort of importation of terrorism, is of course we have in the West have had no choice but to bring in increasingly draconian legal instruments to deal with these people. But of course there are those who are innocent who get caught up in these issues, and those, again, I say, those nations who wish to do us harm can take advantage of these situations and take advantage of our own, what is perceived as a weakness, to use it against us, but certainly to use it against those enemies of those nations. And of course I'm talking about India. Now, James, you reported recently this story in Morecambe, in the northwest of the United Kingdom. right across the media jumped on this actually, and it was a lovely story to start with. Morecambe FC, it's a little local football club, soccer club here in the UK. Soccer's a bit of a national religion in many ways, so the local football clubs are really important to local communities. And Morecambe FC was in financial trouble. In came a group of philanthropic Sikhs. I mean, the story it's very typical from the Sikh community. They saw this struggling football club. Clearly, the guys in that community locally there had an interest in Morecambe FC and said, look, we've got to save the club. Bless them, they stepped in and they saved the club. Fans delighted, everybody delighted, everybody's a winner. Except, unfortunately, it turned out, as James reported recently, that, and it was right across the media, mainstream media, suddenly there was an alleged Sikh terrorist involved in the entity, the Sikh entity, the Sikh group of people, let's call it, who saved the club. And of course, suddenly the right-wing extremists are all over this. Oh, it's blasted! Sikh terrorists have been trying to fund our football clubs. And again, the story explodes. And sadly, to the I have to say the shame of the Western media, certainly the British mainstream media, they said, yeah, this Sikh terrorist was involved, and he's had to be. Unfortunately, the main funding group, let's call it, from the Sikh community, had to distance themselves from this gentleman, a guy called Gurpreet Singh Rahal. And even James, I think, when he reported it, said, yeah, he's been linked with terrorism. So they've had to distance themselves and say, no, he's nothing to do with us anymore, etc., etc. So you think, gosh, what? And I even said at the time, this there's something not quite right about this story, because how unusual. I mean, I always say, to when our critics say Khalistani terrorists, I say, well, show us some evidence of terrorism. You keep labeling these people as terrorists. Where's your evidence? And likewise, up in this story, up comes a so-called Sikh Khalistani terrorist. Well, of course, as the truth came out, the truth was a very different animal, as it tends to be when we talk about India and Khalistan. A huge press release was released a few days ago. This was signed by over 200 Sikh organisations all around the globe, from 12 countries, including James, Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, all right across the diaspora. 200 Sikh organisations, when they heard about this little story, don't forget, this is a little story here in a little local town football club where an individual has been labelled as a terrorist. Globally, this story hit the headlines amongst the Sikh community because this guy is obviously not a terrorist. He's absolutely far from it. In fact, this guy is a gentleman who has been calling out the misbehaviour of India on the public stage. Surprise, surprise, here we are again. It's the same old story. It's an individual, and immediately I'm thinking of Jaswant Singh Kalra as another example of this. It's an individual who's made it his mission to highlight the failings of India and its abuse of human rights. It's misbehaviour, and I'm using that as euphemistically. So this press release, and I won't go through it because it's quite lengthy, but it basically they're explaining. I'll explain. I'll pick out some of the key points of it that are relevant to this. But they did say that look, and it was sent to all the mainstream media. Sorry, James, I've got to show our audience here two little ears that just appeared on your screen. Which is
yeah, she just jumped up and was checking out what's going on.
So, apologies to the audience for slight distraction there. That's why in a very serious story I'm starting to chuckle. But anyway,
my apologies, guys.
So anyway, back to let's try and get serious again now, because this is a big story. This press release does highlight that this is a much bigger story than first appears, because it actually states a very, very dangerous precedent that impacts all of us, not just the Sikh community, but every single individual of us, particularly here in the UK. Now, this was because this was recognised, as always, by the Sikh community first. It's always the Sikh community that recognises these things first, because they are so attuned to oppression, to persecution, because they've suffered it for so many decades. Anyway, the supporting organisations are listed here, and I won't. Again, we don't have time, obviously, to go through each of them. But there are over 200 organisations that have signed this. Now, Just Singh. on Baz News, of course, like many commentators, likewise has written a very interesting, quite a lengthy analysis of what it's all about. And again, we don't have time to go into it in detail. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to just quickly summarise the key points that Jas brought out, which in turn actually reflect the key points of this press release, which in turn actually highlight the key points of this whole story. So it revolves around the gentleman in question, of course, is Gurpreet Singh Rahal. He is this activist. Now, he's been, the UK government has for the first time used the domestic counter-terrorism regime against him individually as an individual, branding him as a British resident and well-known Sikh activist as a terror financier for being suspected of, quote, belonging to organisations involved in terrorism in India, despite not being ever charged, tried or convicted for any crime under UK law. So just to repeat that, because this is really important, this guy has never been found guilty, never been even charged, he's never been in a court of law or anything, so there's been no actual process of law, yet he has been labelled by the British government as being involved in terrorism. That's frightening in itself. So, unsurprisingly, the global Sikh community has condemned the government here in the UK for this decision. Yeah. And they've got together, so there's 200 organisations across 12 countries, 3 continents who've issued this joint condemnation, warning this action is more dangerous than just this simple targeting of a single individual. So the joint press release expressed concern that the sanctions are likely based on, guess what, unverified and unscrutinised intelligence likely supplied by, in their words, foreign authorities such as India, and that the lack of judicial review gives the perception of institutional racism. In other words, it just comes across as simple targeting him because of his race. It's simple institutional racism on behalf of the UK government. Now, the concern is that the British government may be coordinating closely with the Indian state. I mean, what a surprise, to suppress research and commentary on human rights abuses in India, because this is essentially what Gurpreet's been doing, highlighting these very facts. So it represents a chilling escalation, in Jas' words, a chilling escalation of India's campaign of transnational oppression. And those words are likewise mirrored in that press release, with the cooperation of a Western democracy. Now, Gurpreet is described, he's not a militant, is not even a clandestine type of figure. He's a public educator. He's an entrepreneur. He's a commentator whose work is actually widely known right across the Punjabi diaspora, right across the world. And he stands ahead of his platform called Saving Punjab, and it was launched in 2017. And this Saving Punjab organisation, its prime goal is to focus on the governance, the infrastructure, environmental degradation and the human rights, particularly in the Punjab. The clue is in the name. And the focus is, of course, it's placed him in the crosshairs of India, as many people like him end up finding themselves in this situation. They've become a target of the Indian state. So Saving Punjab has reached millions of people in its audience. It's shared, and again, to give it some credibility, its contents are shared by artists, organisations, academics, politicians and ordinary Punjabis globally. He's built up this reputation for openly and publicly and peacefully explaining complex political realities that are happening in the Punjab today. Now, his danger is perceived to stem from the fact that he is effective at public education and political explanation. In other words, he is listened to, he is influential, he's become essentially this, I hate this word influencer, but he has become a Punjabi Sikh influencer, and that is why India is so afraid of him. And he's spoken on international stages right across the world, and one example that they give is in the 2023 United Nations Water Conference in New York. He addressed global diplomats, and he highlighted the key issue that of the Punjab's 5 rivers are being diverted. And he brought up this whole riparian rights problem in the Punjab, where, again, the waters of Punjab are being exploited by central government in India. Now, his addressing these public audiences is not illegal, it's certainly not violent, and it's certainly falls under any reasonable definition of terrorism. He's basically an activist, a peaceful democratic activist. So the core issue is that his work, as was said in the press release relating to India, it challenges the narrative of the Indian state. And this is really what it's all about. He is a voice that is actually alerting the rest of the world to what India are up to. India has its narrative, which it likes to perpetuate, and we talk regularly about how the Indian narrative just dominates. Well, he's one of the few voices that has managed to reach the mainstream to say, no, that narrative is not true. It's fake. It's misinformation. And of course, this means he's become a target of India. Now, India is described as having long equated Sikh political consciousness with extremism. How often do we see that and talk about that? It frames discussions of Sikh self-determination, and there was a whole khalistan concept, as a security threat, and deliberately weaponising the word khalistan to shut down debate. Again, khalistan is often referred to by India as terrorists. And Punjabi Sikh resistance has taken many forms, and certainly in recent years, we had the farmers' protests of 2020, 2021, which was actually, at the time, one of the largest civil resistance movements in modern history. And recent student mobilisations, we talked about in Chandigarh, the Punjabi University, again, that mass mobilisation. But repeatedly, these protests, these demonstrations have shown themselves to be mass-based, in other words, popular, they're very popular, and they are peaceful. Yet, the Indian state responds with surveillance, intimidation, and, of course, assassination. Now, the danger is no longer confined to India. And again, the article in the press release does refer to Avtar Singh Kandar, that Sikh campaigner, the Khalistani campaigner, was allegedly murdered here in the UK, and of course Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, Gurpreet Singh Rahal, he's actually has some links to Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He spoke in the same Gurdwara just a couple of months after his murder. And he's been linked to some of these high-profile Khalistan campaigners. So, of course, he's living in fear. Now, the spotlight does, of course, turn on the British media, which has been criticised heavily now from the Sikh community for reporting about this story and these sanctions with absolutely minimal scrutiny. They haven't actually researched what the story behind it. They've just easily labelled a Sikh individual as a criminal. And they've effectively criminalised him in the public domain. They've criminalised him in the public imagination without any evidence or trial. So they have become complicit in this British state condemning of this guy as a so-called terrorist. And as I talk about what they've actually done to him, the British Treasury, has actually frozen Saving Punjab's assets. They have labelled him as a threat, as a potential terrorist, and thus have frozen his accounts, frozen the assets, etc. Again, this guy has had no opportunity in any court of law to claim otherwise. They've just the state has arbitrarily, on its own opinion, with no evidence in the public domain to support their decision and no right of access or recourse for this individual, they've labelled him as a terrorist and they've closed down his assets. That's why this story is very, very concerning. And to make matters worse, this campaign that's actually sort of snowballed across the media, they've even, for example, just to give you a clue of how ridiculous it's become, he's even now being linked to the 1985 Air India bombing. Now that sounds outrageous in itself, but he wasn't even born in 1985. But this is a tactic that particularly the Indian media are using. They're saying he's linked to this bombing. Again, it just highlights the misinformation. So the credibility, of course, of India's terror narrative is undermined by many things, not least that. But also more recent fabricated claims, like the Air India thing, that have been called into question by lots and lots of individual international agencies. But these claims continue to influence foreign policy decisions abroad, particularly the British government, who obviously take note of this fake narrative from India. And the UK's posture, the UK's position on this is becoming increasingly difficult to separate from its role as a trade and geopolitical entity. In other words, what it's saying is, we're more interested in trade deals than human rights. We are more aligning with India over human rights and abuse of human rights against the likes of poor Gurpreet here. And the Rahal case is particularly dangerous because it establishes this precedent where the state can bypass courts to punish speech, turning counter-terrorism laws, in other words, weaponising counter-terrorism laws into instruments of political convenience rather than public protection. Now, the irony, again, I love this word irony, because this irony drips deep here with the British state. It is now using lawfare against its own citizens in the same way that India has done. Look at Jagtar Singh Johal, look at Amritpal Singh, etc., where the Unlawful Activities of Prevention Act, has been weaponised to detain arbitrarily these individuals. Now we're finding this same attitude, this same weaponizing of law against our Sikh community. This is the first time this has been used like this. This is why we all need to sit the heck up and take notice of what's going on here. Well done again to the Sikh community for highlighting this. The case is about precedent, whether Britain will allow a foreign government to export its repression onto its own soil, onto British soil, and whether dissent, education and political thought can now be criminalised by administrative decree. In other words, that's all big words basically to say, if you're a political dissenter, we will weaponise the law and we'll shut you down. So he may be the first person in this country to face this kind of sanction without due process, but the conclusion is that without resistance, if we don't stand up to this, he will not be the last. And that is a key message. This is why this doesn't just affect the Sikh community. This affects all of us in whichever community you live in here in the UK. And it's a lesson to all Western democracies. Be very, very careful, because what we've witnessed here, this individual has basically been tried and found guilty in no court of law, but certainly in the British state's mind. It has used its instruments, including the Treasury, and including the mainstream media. This is why you must never, ever trust the mainstream media. They are all controlled by individuals who in turn, more often than not, are controlled by the establishment. So the mainstream media will usually echo the establishment's position. Fortunately, thank heavens, we still have the right of freedom of speech here in the UK, which is rapidly diminishing, but we still have the right, I have still the ability to sit here and broadcast to our audience and say, this is happening, be aware of it, be warned. But ultimately, this is a very, very worrying sign. It sits in a general trend that we're seeing here, certainly in the UK, of an authoritarian regime in the form of this Labour government that is now bringing in all sorts of very scary, draconian things like digital ID, scrapping, believe it or not, scrapping jury trials. These are all standing in line, and this is another warning signal to all of us, and well done again to the Sikh community for being the first people to stand up and recognise it happening, as they did, for example, against the grooming gangs. They were again the first people to raise up the issue of grooming gangs, because they recognise these signs. This is a sign that the British state and the British controlled state establishment controlled media are piling on to this to attack Gurpreet. And of course, whipped on by Hindutva over in India and the Indian state. This is why, James, we need to be very, very worried indeed, particularly here in the UK.
Absolutely, Angus. And this is something that we've talked about at great lengths, and that is the weaponization, as you said, of the judicial and the national security laws of India. Is that in the West, when we hear that word terrorist, terrorism, terror, these are words that really draw emotions from the viewers, including ourselves. In India, though, they are using these words as the mechanism to create that distrust, that hatred, that anger, that division, as we've covered in other stories. Now, what they're doing is essentially just using this individual who is peacefully utilizing his right of speech and not encouraging violence, but instead encouraging to accountability by governments for what their actions are. And therefore, the BJP, the Modi regime, the RSS, all of these organizations are targeting them and labeling them with that word terror, terrorist, terrorism, those three words, because they know the impact that that has in our Western nations, although it doesn't have the same meaning when it comes out of India. It's just a word that means that you are speaking out against the government. It doesn't mean that you are taking violent actions in any way, shape, or form, or even have those thoughts. And that is the scary part, is that India is being successful in using their definition to influence policy and oppression of others in foreign states.
Yeah, as I said, this is a very, very dangerous precedent. And it brings back memories a while ago, a number of years ago, and people in the UK may remember this. At a Labour conference, a political conference, their annual conference, there was an individual at the back who, it was an old gentleman, I think he was nearly 80 years old, and he shouted out something that he disagreed with from one of the speakers. And he was arrested under anti-terrorism laws. And there was a huge outcry at the time saying, no, that is abusing terrorism laws. You cannot. He's a political dissenter. You can't use anti-terrorism laws against a political dissenter. That is exactly what's happened here. And at the time, there's a huge outcry. Unfortunately, things quieted down. But this is another what we call a canary in the coal mine. The canary in the coal mine has just dropped dead off its perch. In other words, we're entering very, very dangerous territory. Well done to the Sikh community for uniting behind this. But more of us outside the Sikh community need to understand what's just happened here. This is a frightening precedent of the law being weaponized against political dissent. That is a danger signal. So anyway, James, unfortunately we're massively running out of time. Apologies, I've spent more time than I should have done on this story, but I think it's important because again, this has effectively global impact. This is a Western democracy that is now being undermined by this. So anyway, so I'm gonna drop I had a lovely video which I'll show you tomorrow. Now, a lovely video which actually is quite heartwarming, and it does reflect, I would say, the British white people's general feeling of the Sikh community. It's gone viral, so many people might have seen it already, but I will show that tomorrow. And instead, I'm going to rush into our comments column because we are running out of time now. Anyway, let's move on. And Stay Safe. Thank you, Stay Safe, who has always been a huge contributor in our comments columns right across all our channels. The clash between Hindutva and women's rights. This is an important point. We talked about the abuse of women, how women are seen as second, even third-class citizens within Indian society. And this clash, and again, this highlights the fact that Hindutva, inherent within the ideology of Hindutva, is that women are inferior to men. Hindutva is a very misogynistic, it is a very women-hating ideology. And this Hindutva ideology could lead to a significant setback for the Hindutva movement coming soon, which is good news. The rights of women and minorities have been technically mandated by the UN. So the key point here, and this is really important, when it all goes legal with the establishment of Khalistan, the UN is brought in to arbitrate and decide on these sort of matters. It's going to look at India, and it's going to look at Hindutva, which essentially controls Indian society now through the RSS and through the BJP government. It's going to say, well, you're not treating your women in a very fair manner. You're not treating your minorities in a very fair manner. So again, the evidence is there, all writ large. The evidence is so obvious that India can't even deny that. Again, Jez, we talk about this regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is something that we're probably going to be talking about a lot more as well when it comes to human rights and equality and all of these different things that obviously are not at the forefront of the Hindutva and the various political movements. And it's going to move backwards. And I think that we're also going to have to fight to maintain the right for women to vote in some countries. I think that they're reverting back to some very dangerous times, Angus.
Yeah, India's going to find itself very hard to defend itself against the UN's prevailing attitude that you've got to treat all humanity as equal. Knockdown. Americans still maintain their sovereignty at any cost when it comes to other countries, but Canada, Britain and Australia just release statements. But there's no political will, as you say, to take any action against India, just bogus statements without any action. Yeah, and I think the US has been, I would say, slightly ambiguous, the US administration's attitude towards India. But the US has at least been quite robust about its sovereignty, as it always is. But certainly, and I know, James, here in the UK, I'm always critical about our own government and its pathetic stance with India. We are the submissive party to India. Canada, not quite so.
Exactly, but it's hitting Canada, it's hitting the US, it's hitting everywhere. When we look at the at the sovereignty of these nations, we're being impacted by all of this. So I think that we're looking at a dangerous road ahead.
Yeah, and I talked a lot about our 11 Sikh MPs here in the UK and how ineffective most of them are. Now, there are some notable exceptions to that, as I say. Preet Kaur-Gill's done some sterling work. Jas Atwell, another MP who's stood up regularly for Jagtar Singh Chahal, etc. But a large part of our Sikh MPs have been just failing miserably in their representation of the Sikh community, and one does question certainly that where their loyalties lie, as indeed I did in that show. And but as Tech Talk says, it's called the anti-democratic parliamentary whip system. Yes, we have a system, and I guess it's probably the same in Canada. Is that MPs are whipped by what's called a whip, and it's not literally whipped, but metaphorically speaking, they are whipped into line. You will vote along party lines whether you like it or not. So unfortunately, they're not allowed. Well, they can make that choice, but they will lose the whip if they break ranks and come up against it. it. But the key point here is the leadership should be aligning with the Sikh community. The leadership are only leaders because the Sikh community contributed to their electoral win. So, James, sadly, unfortunately, again, to me, it's deeply undemocratic.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Angus. We do have the same system here in Canada. And we're starting to see, actually, as several MPs recently have crossed the floor from the Conservatives to the Liberals, or just decided that they have had enough and they are retiring out of politics. So again, it shows that, a lot of the time they just follow the, tote the party line, or, toe the party line, as they say. And it's no different here in Canada.
Yeah, and Punjab makes essentially the same comment, but you follow it with, they're as useful as a two-bob watch. I think actually the phrase is useful as a two-bob note. In other words, they're completely useless, which I totally agree with. But anyway, the point there, James, and we had lots of comments about this. Sorry to hear about James's predicament, hoping there wasn't too much damage to his home. And likewise, there was a few other... Oh yeah, TC says, I hope James gets the flood situation under control. And stay safe likewise. Hope your basement is not too flooded, James.
It wasn't too bad. We were able to get on it quick enough. It's just a good thing we were home at the time, or it could have been coming into to a swimming pool instead of a basement.
Surprise, James.
But all is good. Thank you, everyone, for your kind thoughts.
Yeah, surprised James didn't appear today wearing his life jacket. But anyway, Pam Atwell says, Guru Nanak...
the gum boots underneath.
yeah. You haven't seen what he's wearing below the desk. So the first Guru, Nanak Dev Ji, he was born into a Hindu family. Of course, this followed some of our critics who talked about saying, oh, Guru Nanak Dev Ji was a Hindu. Of course he wasn't. As I said at the time, he wasn't. As likewise, as Pam Atwell says, he started the Sikh religion and didn't follow Hindu rituals. Absolutely. He was born into a Hindu family, but he recognized Hinduism as not being completely fair and just and treating each of us as equals. Likewise, the caste system is particularly what he rejected. And as Pam says, this means all Hindus should become Sikhs. As Guru Nanak Dev Ji said, no Hindu, no Muslims. We should all be Sikhs, James.
And it's interesting because the Sikh faith is one that is dedicated and really honors what it is that they preach, that honors what it is that are in those books. And yet you look at many other faiths and they just kind of pick and choose what they're going to follow. But with Sikh, they are dedicated, devoted, and make amazing leaders and amazing neighbors.
Indeed, as we always like to remind everybody, AI chose Sikh as the one religion, if it had to choose one religion, to for the best future for humanity. Just wanted to say, this is quite sort of poignant in many ways. India's always fighting against Sikhs. When the Muslims are ruling or the Mughals are ruling, it was always the Hindus always aligned with the Muslims, the Mughals, against the Sikhs. And likewise, when during the British Empire, it was the Indians, the Hindus, tended to align with the British Empire against the Sikhs. In other words, the Sikhs have always, throughout history, been victims, even since 1947, of course. Well, you likewise say the British Empire, 49 to 1947. So once the Sikh Empire fell, up until the departure of the British, the Hindus aligned with the British against the Sikhs, and since 1947, as we often talk about, again, Sikhs have been the victims there. So sadly, the Sikhs have always been victims of Hindus, essentially, is what it really points down to, James.
Absolutely. And it's, when Khalistan is formed, it's going to show such great strides for success, for leadership, and to show the world how all of these things in the past, good or bad, actually influence how Sikh is going to rule Khalistan in a manner that's equal to all and also honors their history, good and bad, to make it better for the future.
Yeah, and as Jaswinder signs off, may God bless us all. Absolutely nice sign off. And there is an English phrase that I would add to this sort of feeling of victimhood, is that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And I think that is a perfect example applicable to the Sikh community. If you're not killed, it's certainly made you stronger. And as I often say, never make an enemy of a Sikh, because they make terrible enemies. Anyway, final set. Thank you to our final contributors, Jatshir, who says, very based, appreciate Satluj TV, James and Angus. Well, thank you. We appreciate your comments. Amrik Singh has almost the final sign-off. Well, I'll join that with Gurbej Singh. Waheguruji brilliantly explains, salute you, Khalistan Zindabad. And Gurbej says, Waheguruji ka Khalsa, Waheguruji ki Fateh, Khalistan Zindabad, James.
And we love to end the show on that note, as always, Angus.
We certainly do. And indeed, that is the end of the show. We'll have to wrap things up as we are over time as usual. Thanks so much to all of you who have contributed. Thank you for all your comments. Do keep them coming. We do appreciate the comments. Do let us know your thoughts, your perspectives, or anything that you think we should be talking about, or anything that drives your anger. And certainly, I'm sure you'll have a few responses to some of the things we talked about today. So let us know your thoughts. Don't forget, you can, of course, message us directly at message@satludgetv.com if you want to talk to James or myself directly. But that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.